The motorcade lurched forward as the third shot tore through Dealey Plaza, and in that instant, everything changed. Blood splattered across the pink fabric of Jackie Kennedy's suit as she lunged toward the back of the limousine, her white-gloved hands grasping desperately at something the cameras couldn't quite capture. Secret Service agent Clint Hill sprinted toward the presidential vehicle, his shoes pounding against the pavement as screams erupted from the crowd. Governor John Connolly slumped in his seat, wounded, while the President of the United States collapsed into his wife's lap. The date was November 22nd, 1963, and the world was about to witness the most shocking political murder in American history. An event so controversial that even 6 decades later, the questions refused to die. But what really happened in those 6 seconds that shattered a nation? Who pulled the trigger, and more importantly, who wanted John F. Kennedy dead? The official story seems straightforward, almost too clean. But when you start pulling at the threads, the entire narrative begins to unravel in ways that will make you question everything you thought you knew about that fateful day in Dallas. To understand why Kennedy died, you first need to understand who wanted him alive. The morning of November 22nd began with unexpected sunshine breaking through the Dallas clouds, a meteorological gift that would seal the president's fate. Kennedy's team had debated whether to use the bulletproof bubble top on his limousine, a protective measure that might have saved his life, but the improved weather meant they could remove it. The president wanted to connect with the people of Texas, a state critical to his re-election hopes in 1964, and nothing said connection like an open-top car rolling through downtown streets. Kennedy understood the risks. He had told his wife Jackie just that morning that if someone wanted to kill a president with a rifle from a high building, there wasn't much anyone could do about it. The comment would prove prophetic in the most horrifying way possible. The political landscape of 1963 painted Kennedy as a man with countless enemies. His administration had navigated the Cuban Missile Crisis, bringing the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation before pulling back. He had authorized the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, unearning the eternal hatred of anti-Castro Cuban exiles who felt betrayed when promised American air support never materialized. The CIA seethed with resentment toward a president they viewed as weak on communism. The Mafia, which some historians argue, had helped deliver crucial votes in the 1960 election through their control of Chicago's political machine, now found themselves under unprecedented attack from Attorney General Robert Kennedy's Justice Department. Civil rights activists loved Kennedy's rhetoric, but grew frustrated with his cautious approach to legislation. Segregationists despised him for even that limited support. The military-industrial complex worried about his apparent pivot toward peace, including his plans to withdraw from Vietnam. And then there were the oil barons of Texas, furious about his proposal to eliminate the oil depletion allowance that had made them fortunes. The list of people who wanted Kennedy gone read like a directory of America's most powerful institutions. But wanting someone dead and actually killing them required opportunity, means, and perhaps most critically, the ability to control the narrative afterward. What happened in Dallas would test all three. The presidential motorcade departed Love Field Airport at 11:50 a.m., running behind schedule as always. Kennedy and Jackie sat in the back of a modified 1961 Lincoln Continental, designated SS-100X by the Secret Service. Governor Connolly and his wife Nellie occupied the jump seats directly in front of them. Two Secret Service agents sat in the front, driver William Greer and Special Agent Roy Kellerman. The route through Dallas had been published in newspapers days before, a security nightmare that essentially provided a roadmap for anyone planning an attack. The car would travel through downtown, make a right turn onto Houston Street, then a sharp left onto Elm Street, passing directly beneath the Texas School Book Depository, before accelerating onto the Stemmons Freeway toward the Trade Mart, where Kennedy was scheduled to give a luncheon speech. Thousands of people lined the streets, waving and cheering as the presidential limousine rolled past. Jackie, wearing her now infamous pink Chanel suit and pillbox hat, smiled and waved. Kennedy, tanned and vigorous at 46 years old, embodied the youthful energy that had captivated a nation 3 years earlier. Nellie Connolly turned to the president as they approached Dealey Plaza and said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Kennedy smiled and replied, "That is very obvious." Those would be among his last words. Within 60 seconds, the love would turn to chaos, and chaos would transform into a mystery that would consume generations. The limousine made the turn onto Elm Street at approximately 12:30 p.m., slowing to around 11 miles per hour to navigate the sharp corner. Ahead loomed the Texas School Book Depository, a 7-story brick warehouse where thousands of textbooks sat waiting for distribution to schools across Texas. On the 6th floor, behind boxes arranged near the southeast corner window, someone waited with a rifle. Or did they? This is where the official story and the alternative narratives begin their violent divergence, where the simple explanation of a lone gunman starts to crack under the weight of physical evidence, witness testimony, and the laws of physics themselves. The first shot missed entirely, according to most reconstructions, though even this basic fact remains disputed. Some witnesses heard it crack against the pavement. Others thought it was a motorcycle backfire or a firecracker. The second shot, the one the Warren Commission would later identify as the magic bullet, allegedly entered Kennedy's upper back, exited his throat, then struck Governor Connolly, shattering his 5th rib, puncturing his right lung, exiting his chest, smashing through his right wrist, and finally lodging in his left thigh. 1 bullet, 7 wounds, in pristine condition when discovered on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital. The physics of this trajectory would fuel conspiracy theories for decades, with critics arguing that the bullet would have needed to change direction multiple times, defying the laws of ballistics. But was this really impossible, or does the controversy stem from misunderstanding the actual positions of Kennedy and Connolly in the car? The third shot was the kill shot, and nobody disputes its devastating effect. The bullet struck Kennedy in the back of the head, and the result was catastrophic. In the Zapruder film, the most famous piece of amateur footage in history, you can see the president's head snap backward and to the left as a cloud of blood and brain matter erupts. This backward motion has convinced millions of people that the fatal shot came from the front, from the grassy knoll to the right of the motorcade, not from behind where Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly fired from the book depository. 51 witnesses would later tell investigators they thought shots came from the grassy knoll area. Several reported seeing smoke or smelling gunpowder in that vicinity. Impossible if all shots came from the 6th floor window behind the motorcade. Railroad workers standing on the triple overpass saw people running from behind the wooden fence atop the knoll immediately after the shooting. Some witnesses even claimed to see a man with a rifle in that location. So why did the Warren Commission ignore all this evidence and conclude that every shot came from the book depository? The answer might lie in understanding what was at stake. In the immediate aftermath of Kennedy's death, as Lyndon Johnson took the oath of office aboard Air Force One, with Jackie Kennedy standing beside him, still wearing her blood-soaked suit, the new president faced a terrifying possibility. If this assassination was the work of a conspiracy, potentially involving a foreign government, the United States might find itself hurtling toward World War III. Johnson needed answers, but more importantly, he needed answers that wouldn't trigger a nuclear holocaust. The Warren Commission, established a week after the assassination and headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, had a mandate not just to find the truth, but to find a truth America could live with. Was that mandate corrupted from the start? Did political necessity override forensic reality? Lee Harvey Oswald never had a chance to tell his own story. 2 days after Kennedy's murder, while being transferred from Dallas Police Headquarters to the county jail, Oswald was shot and killed by Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner with extensive mob connections, in front of television cameras broadcasting live to millions of Americans. Ruby silenced the alleged assassin forever, transforming Oswald from a potential source of answers into an eternal enigma. In the 48 hours between Kennedy's death and his own, Oswald repeatedly insisted to reporters that he was a patsy, that he hadn't shot anybody, that he didn't even know what he was accused of until police told him. Police claimed he confessed, but no written record of any confession exists. No audio recording was made. The interrogation sessions, which lasted for hours, were never properly documented, a stunning breach of protocol for such a monumental case. Who was Lee Harvey Oswald, and was he capable of pulling off the most consequential murder in American history? Born in New Orleans in 1939, Oswald grew up poor and troubled, bouncing between foster homes and relatives after his father died before he was born. He joined the Marines at 17, where he qualified as a sharpshooter, though his later scores dropped to marksman, the lowest qualification level. He learned Russian, an unusual hobby for a young Marine in the 1950s, and openly espoused Marxist beliefs, behavior that should have triggered intense scrutiny from military intelligence, but apparently didn't. In 1959, he defected to the Soviet Union, or denounced his American citizenship at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and declared his intention to give military secrets to the Soviets. Then, in 1962, he returned to the United States with a Russian wife and baby daughter, facing no legal consequences despite his treason. The State Department even loaned him money for the trip home. How does a defector who offered secrets to America's greatest enemy simply waltz back into the country without facing charges? The anomaly suggests either spectacular incompetence by American intelligence agencies or something more troubling, that Oswald was working for those agencies all along. His activities in the year before Kennedy's assassination paint a portrait of either a confused ideologue or a man playing a role. He moved to New Orleans, where he became active in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, a pro-Castro organization, handing out leaflets and staging demonstrations. But the New Orleans chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee consisted of exactly one member, Oswald himself. He was photographed distributing pro-Castro literature on a street corner, images that would later be used to establish his leftist credentials. Yet witnesses placed him in the company of anti-Castro Cuban exiles, and even at a training camp where those exiles prepared for operations against Castro's government, he visited the house of Guy Bannister, a former FBI agent turned private detective who worked with anti-Castro groups and had connections to organized crime. Oswald's summer of 1963 looks less like genuine political activism and more like an intelligence operation designed to create a paper trail, to build a legend, as spies call it, that would later make him the perfect suspect. In September 1963, Oswald traveled to Mexico City, where he visited both the Cuban and Soviet embassies, allegedly seeking visas to travel to Cuba and then on to the Soviet Union. The CIA photographed and recorded visitors to both embassies as part of routine surveillance operations. But the photographs they claimed were of Oswald looked nothing like him. And when audio recordings of his conversations surfaced years later, the voice didn't match Oswald's either. Was someone impersonating him, creating evidence of his communist connections, setting him up as the perfect fall guy for what was about to happen in Dallas? The Mexico City trip remains one of the most suspicious elements of the entire case, suggesting a level of manipulation far beyond the capabilities of a lone malcontent working in a warehouse. The morning of November 22nd, Oswald rode to work with Buell Wesley Frazier, a co-worker who lived near the boarding house where Oswald stayed during the week, separated from his wife Marina, who lived in Irving, a Dallas suburb. Oswald carried a long package wrapped in brown paper, which he told Frazier contained curtain rods for his room. After the assassination, police would claim this package contained the disassembled Mannlicher Carcano rifle allegedly used in the shooting. But Frazier insisted the package Oswald carried was too short to contain the rifle, even disassembled. The Warren Commission dismissed his testimony, accepting instead the version that fit their predetermined conclusion. The rifle itself raises more questions than it answers. It was a cheap, unreliable Italian military surplus weapon with a misaligned scope, purchased through a mail-order advertisement using the alias A. Heidel. Firearms experts who tested it after the assassination found it difficult to aim and slow to operate, with a stiff bolt that required significant force to cycle. Yet Oswald allegedly fired 3 shots in under 6 seconds, scoring 2 hits on a moving target from 60 feet away, a feat that expert marksmen struggled to replicate even under ideal conditions. The Warren Commission hired the best shooters in the country to recreate the shooting, and none could match the speed and accuracy required. The rifle's trigger pull was so heavy that it threw off aim with each shot. Oswald, whose Marine marksmanship scores had declined to barely passing, supposedly pulled off a shooting sequence that professional snipers found nearly impossible with that specific weapon. Does this make sense, or does it suggest that either Oswald didn't fire those shots, or he wasn't firing alone? The physical evidence from Dealey Plaza tells a complicated story, one the Warren Commission simplified into a neat narrative that ignored inconvenient facts. The Grassy Knoll, a small elevated area to the right and front of the motorcade route, featured a wooden picket fence behind which ran a parking lot and railroad yard. Multiple witnesses reported seeing suspicious activity in this area immediately before, during, and after the shooting. A railroad worker named Lee Bowers, stationed in a control tower overlooking the area, saw two men standing behind the fence right before the shots rang out and observed a flash of light or puff of smoke coming from that location during the shooting. He died in a suspicious car accident 2 years later, one of many witnesses who met untimely deaths in the years following the assassination. A Dallas police officer, Joe Marshall Smith, ran toward the Knoll after hearing shots, where he encountered a man who flashed Secret Service credentials, even though the Secret Service later confirmed that no agents were stationed in that area. Who was this man, and why was he pretending to be Secret Service? The Zapruder film, shot by Abraham Zapruder from a concrete pedestal on the grassy knoll, provides the most detailed visual record of the assassination, 486 frames of 8mm color film, capturing 26.6 seconds of history. Frame 313 shows the moment of the fatal headshot. Kennedy's head exploding in a pink mist as it snaps backward. Generations of assassination researchers have studied this film frame by frame, using it to support various theories about the shooting. The backward head snap convinced many that the shot came from the front, but neurologists and ballistics experts later explained that this movement could result from neuromuscular spasm or the jet effect of exploding brain matter. Still, the violence of the backward motion seems to defy the idea of a shot from behind. And why, if all shots came from the rear, did Jackie Kennedy climb onto the trunk of the limousine? Was she retrieving a piece of her husband's skull, as she later testified, or was she instinctively fleeing toward the source of the shooting, away from where the bullets were coming? The limousine itself became evidence, but only briefly. After Kennedy was pronounced dead at Parkland Hospital at 1 p.m., the Secret Service forcibly took control of his body, overriding Texas law that required an autopsy be performed in the state where the death occurred. They flew Kennedy's body back to Washington on Air Force One, where a botched autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital raised more questions than it answered. The doctors performing the autopsy were not forensic pathologists, and they faced interference from military officials and Secret Service agents throughout the procedure. Photographs and X-rays from the autopsy would later show inconsistencies, with some experts claiming they had been altered. The president's brain, which should have been preserved as crucial evidence, disappeared from the National Archives and has never been found. And the limousine, which should have been preserved as a crime scene, was immediately cleaned, repaired, and returned to service, destroying ballistic and forensic evidence that might have resolved questions about the number and direction of shots. Was this incompetence or deliberate destruction of evidence? If you wanted to cover up a conspiracy, you couldn't have done a better job erasing the physical proof. The autopsy photographs show something the doctors at Parkland Hospital insisted wasn't there: a large exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head. The Parkland doctors, who tried desperately to save the president's life, all described a massive wound in the right rear of his skull, consistent with a shot from the front. But the autopsy photos show the back of his head largely intact, with the devastating exit wound instead located in the right front and top of his skull. Either the Parkland doctors were all mistaken, or the autopsy photographs were altered. The trajectory of the throat wound also sparked controversy. Parkland doctors described it as an entrance wound, small and neat, exactly what you would expect from a bullet entering from the front. But the autopsy report described it as an exit wound, where the bullet that entered Kennedy's back had supposedly emerged. The Parkland doctors had performed a tracheostomy through this wound, destroying its forensic value, which some conspiracy theorists argue was intentional, a way to eliminate evidence of a frontal shot. Back at the Texas School Book Depository, the evidence against Oswald seemed overwhelming at first glance. Police found a rifle hidden behind boxes on the 6th floor, along with 3 spent shell casings near the 6th floor window overlooking Dealey Plaza. They found Oswald's palm print on the rifle barrel, though this print wasn't discovered until after the rifle had been in police custody for 24 hours, raising questions about when it was actually placed there. Witnesses saw a man in the 6th floor window around the time of the shooting, though their descriptions varied, and not all of them identified the man as Oswald. One witness, Arnold Rowland, told police he saw 2 men on the 6th floor, one of whom was holding a rifle, but his testimony was ignored by investigators who had already decided Oswald acted alone. Another employee of the book depository, Bonnie Ray Williams, had eaten lunch on the 6th floor until just minutes before the shooting, leaving behind a chicken bone and a Dr. Pepper bottle. He saw no one else there, no rifle, no sniper's nest of boxes. How long does it take to set up a shooting position? And when did Oswald allegedly do it? The timeline of Oswald's movements after the shooting raises its own problems. Within 90 seconds of the final shot, a Dallas police officer named Marion Baker encountered Oswald in the 2nd floor lunchroom of the book depository, calmly holding a Coke. Baker had his gun drawn, but Building Superintendent Roy truly identified Oswald as an employee, and Baker let him go. To have made it from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor in 90 seconds, Oswald would have needed to hide the rifle, run down 4 flights of stairs, and compose himself enough to appear calm and collected when confronted by an armed officer. Possible? Perhaps? Likely? The skeptics say no. Some researchers argue that Oswald's appearance in the lunchroom is actually evidence of his innocence, that he couldn't have committed the shooting and made it to the 2nd floor so quickly. Others counter that 90 seconds was plenty of time, especially for someone pumped full of adrenaline. Oswald left the book depository within minutes of the assassination, behavior that investigators cited as evidence of guilt. But employees weren't told to remain in the building, and several others left as well. Oswald walked several blocks, then took a bus, then got off the bus when it got stuck in traffic, then took a taxi to his boarding house, where he grabbed a pistol and a jacket before leaving on foot. Was this the panicked flight of a guilty man, or the confused reaction of someone who knew something terrible had happened but didn't know what to do? At approximately 1:15 p.m., Dallas police officer J.D. Tippett encountered Oswald walking in the Oak Cliff neighborhood. What happened next remains disputed, but the result was clear. Tippett ended up dead on the ground with 4 bullets in his body. Witnesses saw Oswald near the scene, saw him with a gun, and later identified him as the shooter. Oswald's pistol was linked to the bullets that killed Tippett. This murder seems open and shut, suggesting that even if questions exist about the Kennedy assassination, Oswald was clearly capable of killing and was armed and dangerous that afternoon. Except the Tippett murder also contains anomalies. Several witnesses described the shooter as shorter and heavier than Oswald, though witness descriptions are notoriously unreliable. The timing of the shooting places Oswald's walk from his boarding house to the Tippett scene as extremely tight, requiring him to move faster than seems reasonable. And the question remains, why did Tippit stop Oswald in the first place? Had Oswald been specifically identified as a suspect already, or was this a chance encounter? If Oswald was being set up, would the conspirators have arranged for him to be caught or killed before he could talk? Did the Tippit shooting represent Oswald fighting back against someone sent to eliminate him? Oswald's capture came at the Texas Theater, where he had slipped in without buying a ticket. See behavior noted by the shoe store manager next door who called police. When officers arrived and turned on the house lights, Oswald was sitting near the back. He stood up and said, "This is it," then struck Officer Nick McDonald before being subdued. He had the pistol used to kill Tippit, and he fought like a man who knew he was going down. At the police station, Oswald maintained his innocence regarding both shootings. He told reporters he was a patsy, that someone would vouch for him, though he never explained who or what he meant. He asked for legal representation but was denied a lawyer during most of his interrogations. He claimed the famous photograph of him holding the Mannlicher Carcano rifle and communist literature, taken in his backyard months earlier, was a fake, with his head pasted onto someone else's body. Modern photographic analysis has confirmed the photo is genuine, but Oswald went to his grave insisting it was fabricated. Was he delusional, or did he know something we don't? Jack Ruby's murder of Oswald on national television was supposed to be the end of the story, the final chapter in a tragic weekend that saw a president and his alleged killer both gunned down in Dallas. But Ruby's act transformed the investigation instead of concluding it, because it raised the most dangerous question of all. Why would a nightclub owner with mob connections kill the man accused of murdering the president? Ruby claimed he did it to spare Jackie Kennedy the agony of a trial, an explanation that satisfies almost no one who has seriously studied the case. Ruby had been a police groupie, hanging around Dallas police headquarters constantly in the days after the assassination, using his connections with officers to gain access to areas where journalists and citizens were barred. He somehow knew exactly when Oswald would be transferred, despite the time being changed at the last minute. He entered the basement of police headquarters through a ramp that should have been guarded, and he shot Oswald in front of 70 Dallas police officers and detectives in an act that was either incredibly bold or incredibly well coordinated. Ruby's mob connections ran deep. He ran nightclubs that served as fronts for organized crime activities, knew major Mafia figures from Chicago to New Orleans, and had been documented making calls to mob-connected individuals in the weeks before the assassination. Under different circumstances, this would have made him a prime suspect in a conspiracy, but the official investigation dismissed his Mafia ties as irrelevant. Ruby later claimed that powerful people were involved in the assassination and that the truth would never come out. He begged to be taken to Washington where he could testify freely, saying he couldn't tell the truth in Dallas because his life was in danger. The Warren Commission interviewed him in Dallas anyway, and Ruby told them a confusing story that seemed to hint at larger forces while never quite revealing specifics. He died of cancer in prison in 1967, just after being granted a new trial, taking whatever secrets he knew to the grave. Was his cancer natural, or was he silenced like Oswald, just more slowly? The Warren Commission published its report in September 1964, concluding that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing President Kennedy, and that Jack Ruby acted alone in killing Oswald. The 888-page report seemed thorough, but it left critical questions unanswered and dismissed evidence that didn't fit the lone gunman theory. The commission never seriously investigated the possibility of conspiracy, despite substantial evidence suggesting coordination among multiple parties. They relied heavily on FBI investigations, even though FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had announced Oswald's guilt within hours of his arrest, long before any serious investigation could have been completed. The CIA, which had extensive files on Oswald dating back to his time in the Soviet Union, provided limited cooperation and withheld crucial information about their operations involving Cuba and their plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. The Warren Commission accepted the conclusions of agencies that had every reason to cover up their own potential involvement or incompetence. The magic bullet theory stands as the Warren Commission's most controversial conclusion. The idea that a single bullet caused 7 wounds in 2 men and emerged in nearly pristine condition. Commission Exhibit 399, the bullet found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital, shows only slight deformation at the base. Nothing like the damage you would expect from a projectile that smashed through bone and tissue multiple times. Ballistics experts who tested the theory by firing the same type of bullet through simulated bone and tissue found that the bullets either fragmented or became severely deformed. Yet the commission insisted this single bullet explanation was necessary because the Zapruder film showed Kennedy and Connolly reacting to wounds too close together in time for separate shots from Oswald's slow-firing rifle. If you reject the single bullet theory, you have to accept that at least 2 shooters were involved. The commission couldn't allow that conclusion, so they bent the evidence to fit the theory, rather than adjusting the theory to fit the evidence. In 1976, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the investigation, this time with a mandate to seriously consider conspiracy. Reusing new acoustic evidence from a police dictabelt recording that captured sounds from Dealey Plaza, acoustic experts concluded that a high probability existed of a 4th shot from the Grassy Knoll, meaning at least 2 shooters were involved. The committee concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, though they couldn't identify the conspirators. This official finding of probable conspiracy should have been headline news, but it was largely ignored by mainstream media and has been forgotten by most Americans who still believe the lone gunman story. Later analysis disputed the acoustic evidence, but questions remain about the validity of those rebuttals. Who benefits from maintaining the lone gunman narrative, and who has the power to shape public perception decades after the fact? The list of people who died under suspicious circumstances after the Kennedy assassination reads like a dark thriller. Dorothy Kilgallen, a journalist who claimed to have explosive information about the assassination, died of a drug overdose in 1965, and her investigation notes disappeared. David Ferry, a pilot with connections to both Oswald and anti-Castro groups, was found dead in his apartment in 1967, shortly after being named as a suspect by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. The coroner ruled it a suicide, but Ferry had left 2 suicide notes, a highly unusual circumstance. George de Mohrenschildt, a Russian émigré who befriended Oswald in Dallas and had connections to intelligence agencies, shot himself in 1977 on the same day a congressional investigator tried to contact him for an interview. Sam Giancana, So the Chicago mob boss who participated in CIA plots to kill Castro was shot in the head in his home in 1975, shortly before he was scheduled to testify before the Senate committee investigating intelligence abuses. Johnny Roselli, another mobster involved in the Castro plots, was found dismembered in an oil drum floating off the Florida coast in 1976 after testifying to that same committee. The statistical probability of so many key witnesses dying violent or suspicious deaths has been calculated at astronomical odds. Are these coincidences or evidence of systematic elimination of anyone who knew too much? The CIA's involvement in the Kennedy assassination remains one of the most persistent theories, supported by the agency's documented plots against foreign leaders, its use of assassins and unwitting assets, and its extensive connections to anti-Castro Cuban exiles who hated Kennedy for abandoning them at the Bay of Pigs. The CIA had means, motive, and opportunity. They had professional killers on their payroll, they had sophisticated methods for covering up operations, and they had been humiliated by Kennedy, who reportedly vowed to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds after the Bay of Pigs disaster. When the agency's files on Oswald and the assassination were finally declassified, they contained hundreds of redacted pages and numerous documents that had been destroyed, supposedly in routine house-cleaning operations. What were they hiding? And does it reveal agency involvement in the plot or just embarrassing incompetence? The Mafia theory argues that organized crime orchestrated the hit as revenge for the Kennedy administration's unprecedented crackdown on mob activities, led by Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The mob had the skills, the shooters, and the motivation. They may have felt betrayed by the Kennedys after allegedly helping deliver votes in the 1960 election through their control of key precincts in Chicago and West Virginia. Carlos Marcello, the godfather of Louisiana, and Santos Traficante, who ran operations in Florida and Cuba, both had expressed desire to eliminate the Kennedys. Jack Ruby's mob connections provided the perfect way to silence Oswald before he could reveal the conspiracy. The Mafia theory explains much, but it struggles with the question of how organized crime could have orchestrated the cover-up at such high levels of government, unless they had help from corrupted elements within intelligence agencies. The military-industrial complex had perhaps the strongest motive. Billions of dollars in defense contracts at stake if Kennedy carried through on his plans to wind down the Cold War and withdraw from Vietnam. Kennedy had signed National Security Action Memorandum 263 in October 1963, ordering the withdrawal of 1,000 military advisors from Vietnam by the end of that year and planning full withdrawal by 1965. After his death, Lyndon Johnson reversed these orders, and American involvement in Vietnam escalated into a full-scale war that would kill 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese while enriching defense contractors. So Kennedy had also pursued détente with the Soviet Union, negotiating the nuclear test ban treaty and opening back channels for dialogue with Khrushchev. His American University speech in June 1963 called for reconsidering Cold War assumptions and finding paths toward peace. These positions terrified hardliners who saw the Soviet Union as an existential threat that could only be countered through military strength. Did hawks within the Pentagon and intelligence community decide that Kennedy was too dangerous to American security to be allowed to continue? What if the truth is that all these groups were involved, each playing a role in a convergence of interests that came together in Dallas? What if anti-Castro Cubans, angry about the Bay of Pigs, provided the shooters? What if the Mafia, seeking revenge and protection from prosecution, facilitated the operation and silenced Oswald through Ruby? What if CIA elements, using their expertise in covert operations, coordinated the plot and the cover-up? What if military and intelligence hardliners, convinced Kennedy was soft on communism, gave tacit approval or looked the other way? This convergence theory explains the sophistication of the operation, the multiple shooters, the immediate cover-up, and the ability to control investigations at the highest levels. It explains why so much evidence points in different directions, because different elements of the conspiracy came from different groups with different specialties and different connections. The impact of Kennedy's assassination extended far beyond his death. It shattered American innocence and created a permanent undercurrent of distrust in government that persists today. Before Dallas, most Americans trusted their leaders and believed official explanations. After Dallas, that trust was broken, replaced by cynicism and conspiracy, thinking that would be reinforced by Vietnam, Watergate, and every subsequent scandal. The assassination fundamentally changed how Americans view power, secrecy, and truth. It created a template for questioning official narratives that would be applied to everything from moon landings to 9/11. Whether you believe in the conspiracy or not, you cannot deny that November 22, 1963 marked a turning point in American consciousness, the moment when the age of innocence ended and the age of suspicion began. Robert Kennedy's reaction to his brother's death tells its own story. He immediately suspected a conspiracy and spent years quietly investigating, using his own contacts and resources. He knew about the CIA's plots against Castro, having authorized some of them. He knew about the mob's hatred of the Kennedy administration. He believed that his own aggressive pursuit of organized crime might have led to his brother's death, a guilt that haunted him for the rest of his life. In 1968, when Robert Kennedy was himself assassinated while running for president, the questions multiplied. 2 Kennedys dead, both killed by supposed lone gunmen with questionable backstories and connections to intelligence agencies. Coincidence? The odds seem impossibly long. The technology of assassination has evolved since 1963, but the questions remain timeless. Who has the power to kill a president? Who has the power to cover it up? What happens when the institutions responsible for finding truth have reasons to conceal it? The Kennedy assassination forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities about how power actually operates in America, about whether democracy can function when security agencies operate in secrecy, about whether justice is possible when evidence can be destroyed and witnesses can be silenced. The files on the Kennedy assassination were supposed to be fully released in 2017, according to the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act, passed by Congress in 1992. But when the deadline arrived, President Trump, under pressure from CIA and FBI officials, agreed to keep thousands of documents classified on grounds of national security. President Biden later released more documents, but thousands remain hidden, their contents deemed too sensitive for public viewing 60 years after the event. What could those documents possibly contain that still threatens national security in 2024? The continued classification suggests that whatever really happened in Dallas, powerful people still believe the truth would be more dangerous than the uncertainty. The physical evidence that remains available continues to fuel debate. Enhanced versions of the Zapruder film, studied frame by frame with modern technology, show details invisible to the Warren Commission. Computer models of Dealey Plaza allow researchers to test theories about bullet trajectories and timing. Acoustic analysis of the police recordings remains contentious, but suggests the possibility of shots from multiple locations. Medical evidence has been re-examined by independent experts who reach different conclusions than the official autopsy. None of this settles the question definitively, but it keeps the investigation alive in the minds of those who refuse to accept the official story. The cultural impact of the assassination echoes through art, film, literature, and music. Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK brought conspiracy theories to a mass audience and prompted the legislation requiring release of assassination records. Countless books have been written, some supporting the Warren Commission, others detailing elaborate conspiracies. The assassination has become a touchstone in American culture, shorthand for loss of innocence and government betrayal. Every generation rediscovers the mystery and applies its own technology and assumptions to the evidence. The question persists: what really happened in Dallas? Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that we will never know the complete truth. That too much time has passed, too many witnesses have died, too much evidence has been destroyed, and too many powerful institutions have invested in maintaining the official narrative. The Kennedy assassination may remain forever in that frustrating space between obvious conspiracy and unprovable certainty, where the evidence suggests coordination and cover-up, but never quite provides the smoking gun that would convince skeptics and silence defenders of the Warren Commission. This ambiguity serves those who benefit from confusion, because a public that cannot agree on basic facts about a presidential assassination is a public that has lost faith in its ability to know truth at all. The personal toll on those closest to Kennedy cannot be measured in evidence or theories. Jackie Kennedy lived another 30 years, rarely speaking publicly about that day in Dallas, protecting her children and her husband's legacy while carrying the trauma of watching him die in her lap. She married Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis in 1968, a union that shocked many Americans who saw it as a betrayal of Kennedy's memory, but perhaps it represented her desperate attempt to find security and escape the nightmare that had consumed her. She died in 1994, taking her most private memories of that day to the grave. Caroline Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, Jr. She grew up as the children of a martyred president, their lives forever shaped by a murder they were too young to fully understand. John Jr. died in a plane crash in 1999, ending the Kennedy dynasty in yet another tragic death that conspiracy theorists inevitably link to his father's assassination. Lyndon Johnson, who benefited most directly from Kennedy's death by ascending to the presidency, lived with the suspicions that surrounded him until his own death in 1973. In his final years, he grew increasingly paranoid and depressed, aware that history would always question whether he had prior knowledge of the assassination or even played a role in it. Johnson had been on the verge of being dropped from the 1964 ticket due to various scandals when Kennedy died. The assassination saved his political career and gave him the power to implement his Great Society programs. But it also trapped him in Vietnam, a war he inherited from Kennedy, but expanded into a catastrophe that destroyed his presidency and his legacy. In tape-recorded conversations from his final years, Johnson expressed doubts about the Warren Commission's findings and suggested that Kennedy's death might have been revenge for CIA plots against Castro. Was this genuine doubt or Johnson's attempt to deflect suspicion from himself? The Secret Service's failures that day in Dallas represent either catastrophic incompetence or something more sinister. The route through Dealey Plaza violated basic security protocols by including sharp turns that forced the motorcade to slow down, creating perfect conditions for an ambush. The buildings along the route were not properly secured, despite standard procedure requiring all windows overlooking the presidential route to be checked and secured. The Secret Service detail was understaffed, with agents nursing hangovers from a late night of drinking in Fort Worth the night before. After the shooting, the Secret Service seized control of the investigation in ways that compromised the integrity of evidence collection. They cleaned the limousine. They controlled access to Kennedy's body during the autopsy. They lost or destroyed photographs and documents. Either the Secret Service was astonishingly incompetent that day, or some members of the detail were complicit in allowing the assassination to happen. The alternative, that they were simply unprepared for a professional hit, is almost as disturbing as the conspiracy theories. The role of George H.W. Bush in the Kennedy assassination remains one of the most intriguing peripheral mysteries. Bush, who would later become CIA director and eventually president, was in Dallas on November 22, 1963, though he claimed for years not to remember where he was that day. Documents released decades later showed that a Mr. George Bush of the CIA was briefed on the assassination's impact on anti-Castro Cuban groups on November 23, 1963. Bush and the CIA both claimed this referred to a different George Bush, a CIA employee with no connection to the future president. But researchers found that explanation unconvincing. Bush had extensive connections to the intelligence community, even before officially joining the CIA. His oil company employed anti-Castro Cubans with intelligence connections. He knew George de Mohrenschildt, Oswald's mysterious benefactor in Dallas. The connections are circumstantial, but they place another future president in the web of relationships surrounding the assassination. Does this mean anything, or is it simply the reality that in elite circles, everyone knows everyone eventually? The Zapruder film itself has a strange history that feeds conspiracy theories. Abraham Zapruder sold the rights to Life magazine for $150,000, and Life kept the film largely out of public view for years, printing only selected frames and never allowing it to be shown as a motion picture. When the film was finally broadcast on television in 1975, millions of Americans saw for the first time the brutal reality of Kennedy's death. The violent backward snap of his head that seemed to confirm a shot from the front. Why did Life suppress this crucial evidence for so long? Some argue they were protecting the public from traumatic images. Others suggest they were protecting the Warren Commission's conclusions from visual evidence that contradicted the official story. Life magazine had its own connections to intelligence agencies, with some staff members having worked with the CIA. the magazine's decision to control access to the most important visual evidence of the crime remains suspicious to those inclined toward conspiracy thinking. The medical evidence continues to generate controversy because of the stark contradictions between what doctors in Dallas saw and what the official autopsy claimed. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, who was in the emergency room at Parkland Hospital when Kennedy was brought in, wrote a book years later describing a massive wound in the back right side of Kennedy's head, consistent with a shot from the front. Other Parkland doctors gave similar descriptions. The emergency room nurse drew diagrams showing the head wound in the rear of the skull, yet the autopsy photos show the back of the head intact. Either multiple trained medical professionals all misremembered the same thing in the same way, or the autopsy photographs were altered. The fact that Kennedy's brain disappeared from the National Archives makes it impossible to resolve this question definitively. Without the brain, modern forensic scientists cannot determine the actual trajectory of the fatal bullet. Was the brain lost through negligence? Or was it destroyed because it contained evidence that contradicted the official story? The question of how many shooters were involved depends largely on which evidence you choose to credit. The acoustic evidence suggests 4 shots, meaning at least 2 shooters. The medical evidence, suggesting shots from different directions, supports multiple shooters. The witness testimony placing suspicious persons at the Grassy Knoll suggests at least 1 additional shooter beyond Oswald. But the physical evidence is less clear. Only 3 shell casings were found in the book depository, and only 3 bullets or major fragments were recovered, though some researchers argue that more fragments exist than can be accounted for by 3 bullets. The wounds in Kennedy and Connolly could theoretically be explained by 2 bullets, as the Warren Commission argued, though the single bullet theory strains credibility. If you accept that all shots came from the book depository, then Oswald could have acted alone. If you accept evidence of shots from other locations, then conspiracy becomes certain. The choice of which evidence to trust reveals as much about the evaluator as it does about the assassination. The psychological profile of Lee Harvey Oswald offers no clear answers. Was he a delusional loner seeking fame through violence, as the Warren Commission suggested? Was he a dedicated Marxist willing to kill for his beliefs? Was he an intelligence asset who thought he was working undercover and found himself set up as a patsy? Or was he exactly what he claimed, an innocent man in the wrong place at the wrong time? The evidence supports all these possibilities to varying degrees. Oswald's time in the Soviet Union could have been a defection or a spy mission. His pro-Castro activities could have been genuine political activism or building a cover story. His alleged rifle skills could have been sufficient for the assassination or completely inadequate. His behavior after the shooting could indicate guilt or confusion. The truth about Oswald's psychology and motivations died with him in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters, murdered before he could tell his own story, which may have been exactly the point of Jack Ruby's intervention. Modern forensic science has offered new tools for examining the assassination, but these tools have not settled the debate. Computer modeling of the shooting has been used both to support and contradict the single bullet theory, depending on what assumptions are fed into the models. Acoustic analysis remains contested, with experts on both sides claiming their interpretation is correct. DNA analysis could potentially identify who handled various pieces of evidence, but much of that evidence has been contaminated over decades of handling or has disappeared entirely. Photographic enhancement technology has revealed new details in images from Dealey Plaza, but these details are subject to interpretation. Science can only answer the questions we know to ask, and the Kennedy assassination may involve questions we have not yet formulated properly. The international dimension of the assassination adds yet another layer of complexity. Was this purely an American crime, or did foreign powers play a role? The Soviet Union had obvious motives, but they also had strong reasons to avoid provoking nuclear war by killing an American president. Castro's Cuba certainly had cause to seek revenge for CIA assassination attempts and the Bay of Pigs invasion, and Oswald's connections to pro-Castro groups provide a possible link. But would Castro risk American retaliation by ordering such an act? Some theories point to anti-Castro Cubans, furious at Kennedy for abandoning them as more likely culprits. They had the motivation. They had been trained by the CIA in assassination techniques, and they had nothing to lose. Several anti-Castro activists had threatened Kennedy publicly. If they were involved, did they act alone or with encouragement from American intelligence officers who shared their hatred of Kennedy's Cuba policy? The question of why Kennedy was killed matters as much as who killed him, because the motive tells us what the assassination was really about. If it was about Cuba, then the killing was revenge or an attempt to force American intervention. If it was about Vietnam, then it was about preserving the military-industrial complex and preventing peace. If it was about organized crime, then it was about survival and power in the underworld. If it was about domestic politics, then it was about who would control the direction of American government. Each motive points to different conspirators and different meanings for the crime. The multiplicity of possible motives actually makes conspiracy more likely rather than less. Because so many powerful interests had reasons to want Kennedy gone. The challenge is determining which motive was sufficient to trigger the actual plot. The role of the media in shaping public perception of the assassination cannot be understated. In the immediate aftermath, media largely accepted and promoted the official narrative of Oswald as a lone gunman. Journalists who questioned this narrative found themselves marginalized or dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Over time, as evidence of cover-up accumulated and the Warren Commission's conclusions were challenged, some mainstream outlets became more willing to examine alternative theories. But even today, serious discussion of assassination conspiracy theories often carries a social cost, with believers dismissed as cranks, despite the substantial evidence supporting their skepticism. The term conspiracy theory itself has become a weapon used to discredit inquiry rather than a neutral description of a type of claim. Who benefits from this stigmatization, and does it prevent legitimate investigation of genuine conspiracies? The emotional and psychological impact of living with uncertainty about such a consequential event has shaped American culture in subtle ways. The assassination created a template for how Americans process national trauma, combining grief with suspicion, mourning with investigation, acceptance with perpetual questioning. Every subsequent national tragedy has been filtered through the lens of Dallas, with immediate speculation about whether official explanations can be trusted. This institutional skepticism has both positive and negative effects. It prevents blind acceptance of authority and encourages citizens to demand accountability. but it also creates fertile ground for baseless conspiracy theories that distract from real problems and real conspiracies. The Kennedy assassination taught Americans to question everything, but it has not taught them how to distinguish between legitimate questions and paranoid speculation. If there was a conspiracy, the conspirators achieved their immediate goal of eliminating Kennedy, but may have failed in their larger objectives. Kennedy's death made him a martyr and cemented his legacy in ways that his presidency might not have achieved. His calls for peace and civil rights became more powerful in death than they had been in life. The Vietnam War that may have been prevented by his continued presidency became instead a catastrophic mistake that discredited the military establishment and intelligence agencies. The mob, if they were involved, found themselves under even more intense prosecution from Robert Kennedy until his own assassination in 1968. The CIA faced decades of investigation and restriction after their abuses were exposed in the 1970s. If powerful interests killed Kennedy to protect themselves, they may have instead accelerated their own decline. But they did succeed in one crucial way. They created enough confusion and uncertainty that 60 years later, we still cannot definitively say what happened. That ambiguity has protected the guilty, whoever they may be, far more effectively than any cover-up could have. The question of what would have happened if Kennedy had lived remains the ultimate counterfactual of American history. Would he have withdrawn from Vietnam, saving 58,000 American lives and countless Vietnamese lives? Would his second term have brought the comprehensive civil rights legislation that Johnson eventually passed? Or would Kennedy's caution have delayed those achievements? Would the Cold War have thawed more quickly with Kennedy pursuing détente? Or would his hawkish advisers have pulled him toward confrontation? Would organized crime have been broken by continued Kennedy prosecution, or would they have found ways to corrupt the administration? These questions cannot be answered, but they haunt American historical consciousness because they represent paths not taken, possibilities foreclosed by bullets in Dallas. The assassination did not just end one man's life. It terminated entire potential futures for America and the world. The personal stories of those who were there that day carry a weight that transcends political analysis and conspiracy theories. Abraham Zapruder, who filmed the killing, was so traumatized by what he witnessed that he could barely speak about it for the rest of his life. The Secret Service agents who failed to protect Kennedy carried guilt that consumed them. The Parkland Hospital doctors who tried desperately to save the president knew their efforts were futile but worked anyway, then had to live with the memory of his shattered head and Jackie Kennedy's pink suit soaked in blood. The Dallas police officers who arrested Oswald and then failed to protect him from Ruby faced questions about their competence and possible complicity for the rest of their careers. The ordinary citizens who lined the streets that day, waving and cheering, and then heard the shots and saw the carnage, had their innocence stolen in an instant. These personal tragedies do not answer the question of conspiracy, but they remind us that behind all the theories and evidence are real people whose lives were forever changed by 6 seconds of violence. The legacy of November 22nd, 1963 extends far beyond the specific questions of who killed Kennedy and why. The assassination marked a turning point in American innocence, the moment when the post-World War II optimism began to curdle into cynicism. It demonstrated that political violence could reach the highest levels of American power. It showed that official investigations could not always be trusted to reveal truth. It created a permanent industry of assassination research that continues today with new books, documentaries, and theories appearing regularly. It established a model for questioning authority that would be applied to everything from moon landings to 9/11, and it left a wound in American consciousness that has never fully healed, a persistent sense that something terrible happened that day in Dallas, something worse than just one man with a rifle, something that powerful forces worked to conceal, something that, if fully revealed, might change how we understand power in America. The final irony of the Kennedy assassination is that the more we learn, the less certain we become. Each new document release, each new witness interview, each new forensic analysis adds information but rarely provides clarity. The evidence points in multiple directions simultaneously, supporting various theories while conclusively proving none. This is either the mark of a conspiracy so sophisticated that it successfully obscured the truth, or the natural result of a chaotic event that defied simple explanation. The human mind craves narrative coherence, clean stories with clear beginnings, middles, and ends. The Kennedy assassination refuses to provide that satisfaction. It remains messy, contradictory, and ambiguous, a puzzle with pieces that do not quite fit together no matter how you arrange them. So what really happened on November 22nd, 1963? Was it Lee Harvey Oswald alone? A disturbed loner seeking fame through the murder of a president? Was it a conspiracy involving anti-Castro Cubans and rogue CIA elements? Was it the Mafia taking revenge on the Kennedy brothers for prosecution and betrayal? Was it the military-industrial complex preventing peace? Was it a convergence of all these interests, multiple groups with different motives all contributing to a plot that killed Kennedy and then covered up their involvement? The honest answer is that we do not know with certainty, and unless dramatic new evidence emerges, we may never know. The passage of time has made definitive proof nearly impossible. The witnesses are dead, the documents are destroyed or still classified, the physical evidence has been contaminated or lost. What remains is a historical murder mystery that continues to fascinate because it touches something fundamental about power, truth, and the stories nations tell themselves. If you found yourself gripped by this deep dive into one of history's most enduring mysteries, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our investigations into the events that shaped our world. Drop a comment below with your theory about what really happened in Dallas, whether you believe the official story or think something darker was at work. And hit that like button if you want to see more content that challenges conventional narratives and asks the hard questions that mainstream sources often avoid. The truth about November 22nd, 1963 may remain elusive, but the pursuit of that truth, the refusal to simply accept what we are told, remains as important today as it was 60 years ago. The assassination of John F. Kennedy reminds us that, in matters of power and secrecy, we must always question, always investigate, and never stop seeking truth, even when that truth proves frustratingly difficult to find. Until the next investigation, keep questioning, keep searching, and never stop demanding answers to the mysteries that shape our history.